I'm with Rosie Ross, who's from the UK but now lives in Ashkelon. Now, you've just recently moved to Ashkelon. What's it like living in Ashkelon?
It's very different to living in Jerusalem. We lived in Jerusalem for over 20 years, which is a very intense place to live, a lot of conflict. Ashkelon, well, we also have a lot of conflict in Ashkelon, but not all the time. It's rather different. And actually, we live right next to the sea. We live overlooking the marina. So it's almost like being on holiday some of the time. We're really enjoying it. It's relatively peaceful, except at certain times when the pressure's on, and we'll talk about that. But we're enjoying it. There are a lot of Russians, a lot of Russian immigrants in Ashkelon. So I've got my local Russian shop where you can get Russian produce, a bit of English produce as well. And yeah, I'm enjoying Ashkelon.
Is it as religious as Jerusalem?
Not at all. Not at all. There are religious people. There's Chabad, which is ultra-Orthodox community in Ashkelon. There are a lot of traditional Jews who would keep the Sabbath, but not as religious as Jerusalem by any stretch of the imagination.
Now, you're not really all that far from Gaza, so what's it like being so close to Gaza? What situations do you face with that?
We are close. We're about 15 miles away. And yes, I did wonder how it was going to be, but we have a wonderful friend who's a believer in Jesus, Jewish believer in Jesus, and she's been very encouraging. She's lived through quite a lot of the onslaughts that Ashkelon has faced from Gaza, and she's a very prayerful person and really learnt to live with war and to pray through it. And she actually goes, she says, I feel most alive when there's some sort of war going on. I'm not sure that I'm quite that way, but yeah, she's been a real encouragement to not fear. And we had an experience, it's only about a month ago now. Everything happens so quickly here. We've had so many other things going on. But we had several days over what's called Tisha B'Av, which is the 9th of Av, which in the Jewish calendar is a very sad day. It's a day of mourning the loss of the temples. It's also a day of mourning many atrocities that happened to the Jewish people. So actually, not surprisingly in spiritual terms, there was an onslaught against the Jewish people at that particular period of time.
What do you mean by onslaught? What actually physically happened?
What happened was there were many rockets being fired from Gaza to Ashkelon. It was by the Islamic Jihad.
What's it like when you know that there is a rocket coming into Ashkelon?
We hear the siren go off. We know what we have to do. We have to go quickly to the safe room, which is outside of our flat. We're in a kind of block of flats, so we had to just walk along or walk quickly along the corridor to the safe room. And then you would hear usually the Iron Dome intercepting the rocket, and that would be quite a loud noise, but we would be very thankful that Israel does have that defense system. We did have one rocket that actually landed very close to us. I have to confess that I was actually in Jerusalem at that time. I'd escaped from Ashkelon. I came up to Jerusalem for Tisha B'Av. That's another story. But my husband was still in Ashkelon, and he said he heard this loud bang, and he actually wondered whether our flat was still going to be standing when he came out of the safe room. Thankfully, it was, but the rocket had landed in the sea close by, so it wasn't far away.
How do you know that there's a rocket coming into Ashkelon?
The sirens go off. That tells us, so we know we've got a short period to get to a safe room.
When you say short, how long do you have?
I think it's 20 seconds.
Wow.
I think it's 20 seconds. I know in Sderot, which is closer to the border, it's 15 seconds. It may be 30 seconds. We just knew we had to move quickly. And one thing which was wonderful was that two friends of ours who've been with us in some of our tough times were actually staying with us. That's the goodness of God. You know, they were staying with us at the time, and they have been through lots. They've been through wars in their time, and they were very calm. And that was lovely because it was our first time. We had been in situations where there'd been rockets in Jerusalem, but Jerusalem doesn't tend to face the same rocket attacks. We're not in Jerusalem, we're not that close.
So are there rocket shelters everywhere in Ashkelon?
Okay, yes. And I will tell one story. When I came back from Jerusalem to Ashkelon, the rockets were still being fired, and I started to get a bit nervous as I was coming towards Ashkelon, and I was praying, and I just had this feeling, well, what happens if a rocket actually is fired when I'm coming out of the bus and I'm going towards the car? I'm hoping my husband's going to be there in the car. And what happens if he's driving in the car? What do I do? And I was so reassured because literally I got off the bus, the siren went, and in front of me, as I got off the bus, there was a bomb shelter, and actually been donated by the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews, which in itself is a beautiful thing, that they had donated money so that we could have that safe room. So I felt so much calmer when I knew that bomb shelter was there.
So you spoke about the Iron Dome. What is the Iron Dome? What does that do?
It's Israel's defense system, and it intercepts the rockets coming in. So there'll be shrapnel that falls to the ground, and sometimes you have to be careful that you don't get hit by the shrapnel. But it's very successful. I think it's over, something like 96% successful. I mean, Israel have been improving the technology so that it's become more and more successful.
Is this scary, or do you just take it as part of life down in Ashkelon?
Yes, I mean, as I say, coming back into that height of the war, I mean, it was a mini war, very mini war, but I felt nervous, but I have to say I knew that I was being prayed for. I knew friends in England, other places were praying for me, and I know that made me much calmer than I might have been.
Now, on a completely different subject, you're British, and yesterday was the state funeral of the Queen. How did you feel when you heard the news that the Queen had died?
Alongside everybody else, I was very sad. I had been alerted to it actually by an Israeli friend. She told me that the Queen was not well. So I was aware. I think that helped prepare me. And it was like I was praying for the Queen at that point, just lifting her up to the Lord, and sort of felt close to the situation. And so it wasn't such a shock, which I'm really grateful for, actually. I was so glad that Liz Truss had been appointed Prime Minister just 2 days before. I think it was wonderful that happened just 2 days before, and that she was able to officially anoint, I don't know what the official term is, Liz Truss. And yeah, the Queen, well, so much has been said about her, but personally, we had lived close to Sandringham. We went back to England for 2 years. We lived in England for 2 years back in 2019 to 2021. And we were living very close to Sandringham. We used to go with my mother to Sandringham. And we used to have tea in the tea shop there. We used to walk around the grounds and the woods. And I felt connected to the Queen through that because, of course, that was one of her homes. Also, we used to listen to the Queen every Christmas Day, even having lived in Israel and lived amongst the Jewish people for so long. We still had this British tradition of listening to the Queen on Christmas Day, and it was a highlight of Christmas. It was just special for us, and she often had wise words. And I loved the way in which she spoke about her faith. I loved the way in which she had a real regard for the Jewish community. And there's a wonderful story about how in 2005 she met Holocaust survivors, of course, which is close to my heart, and really honoured them and really gave them time and really lingered in that time with Holocaust survivors.
And she had a real faith as well, and that was reflected in her funeral, which she actually prepared, isn't it?
She had such a faith in Jesus. It's so encouraging, and it's so encouraging how in her death that has gone forth to millions, billions of people through the service yesterday. I think it's such a wonderful testimony.
So is this something that you will always remember? I was doing such and such when the Queen died. What were you doing?
I think I was in the kitchen, and this was the time between her being ill and actually dying. Colin actually came in, that's my husband, and said that she had gone. Yeah, it was shortly. I think it was shortly before we went to bed. But yeah, what I will remember here actually is that 3 of us went to St. George's Cathedral here in Jerusalem for the special memorial service for her. So it was lovely that we were able to pay our last respects to Her Majesty here in Jerusalem. I didn't have to be back in England to pay my respects. I was able to be with other British people who live here, and we heard the British ambassador read a lesson, we heard the British consul general read a lesson, we heard someone play the bagpipes, play Amazing Grace, we signed the Book of Condolences. It was very special to do that.
What's your prayer for King Charles?
My prayer is that he would follow his mother's example.
Okay, Rosie, well, thank you for sharing.
It's been a pleasure.